Hey guys, welcome to the Python Django crash course. In the next hour or so, I'm going to cram as much info as I can about the Django framework. We're going to take a few minutes to talk about what it is, look at some slides, and then we're going to jump in and we're going to build a simple blog application with an admin area. Now, this video is for absolute beginners, people that have basically never used Django before and want to learn about it, or have used it very briefly and don't really understand it and don't really understand the file structure and all that. I will have more advanced videos on Django in the future, but this is basically a starting point for people that want to learn it. Okay, I know I have a lot of JavaScript developers subscribed to my channel because that's mostly what I do, but I would encourage you to take a look at Django, even if you don't know Python. It's a very high-level language, high-level framework, and it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. All right, so sit back, relax, and let's learn Django. This video is sponsored by GPD Host. They offer a variety of affordable hosting plans with flexible billing cycles. These plans include a free SSL certificate, a free domain name, website builder, and many other services, including free website migration with no downtime. To find out more, visit gpdhost.com or click the link in the description below. Alright guys, so I do have a to-do list Django project video, and I'm not really happy with it because I didn't do much explanation. It was more of a code along type video, so I wanted to remake a basic Django course and explain things a little more, go through some slides so we can talk about exactly what it is, the type of design pattern it uses, some of the advantages, things like that. Alright, I'm also doing this on Windows. I did the other one on Linux Ubuntu. The reason for Windows is because a lot of beginners use it, and also setting up Python and Django on Windows is a bit different than doing it on a Mac or Linux. It's gotten much easier. I know that you may have heard in the past that it's really difficult, but it's very easy now. And you'll see that. So this is completely cross-platform. The framework itself does not change depending on what system you're using, so don't worry about it. If you're on a Mac or Linux, you'll be able to follow along just fine. All right. And as I said, even if you don't know Python, just follow along. It's all convention. If you understand basic programming fundamentals like functions and if statements and things like that, you'll be absolutely fine. So what exactly is Django? It's a high-level Python web framework, and I'll talk about high-level and low-level in a minute. It's also free and open source, like most great frameworks. It really encourages rapid development and getting things up and running very quickly. It follows the MTV, or Model Template View design pattern, which I'll talk about in a few minutes as well. Alright, so like I said, Python Django is high level compared to a low level framework like Flask, which is also a very popular Python framework. Now with Flask, you're free to do things on your own, in your own way. One Flask application can look completely different from another in terms of the folder structure and all that type of thing, even if the functionality is very similar. Well, with Django, there's certain ways to do things, the Django way. It's very opinionated, similar to Ruby on Rails, if you've ever worked with that framework, which is a great framework. Now, you may think that having more freedom is better, and that may be true in some cases for some developers and some applications. But for the most part, Django is going to have you do things in the best way possible, the best and the easiest way possible, and not let you screw yourself up. So with that said, Django is a great framework for beginners, in my opinion. So what are some of the advantages to using the Django framework? As I said, it was created for rapid development, so it's great to get something up and running very quickly. You can create an entire back-end administration system for your models in minutes, and then every model you create, it's very simple to add to that back-end. Django is full-featured and fully loaded. It has a ton of functionality in its core, like user authentication, administration, RSS feeds, sitemaps. We're not going to get into all of that. This is kind of just a basic overview, but that stuff, it is included, and it is a pretty put-together framework. Now, for the size and the feature set of Django, it performs very well. It's secure, and it protects you from things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting attacks, and cross-site forgery, things like that. Django is also very scalable. It can handle lots of traffic. In the next slide, we're going to look at some of the sites that that do use Django or have used Django in the past. It's also very versatile. It can be used to build all kinds of diverse applications, from social networks and content management systems to things like scientific computing platforms. And of course, it runs on Python, which is a very powerful and versatile language itself. So these are some of the sites, some of the names that use Django or have used Django in their sites, or part of their sites and applications. Now, when any huge name uses a framework, it's usually highly customized, sometimes beyond recognition, but they all run Django at their core. Okay, so they just modify it to their needs. So sites like Discuss, Instagram, Pinterest, these are all A+ companies and websites. Even NASA uses Django in their stack, which shows you how secure it can be. All right, so it's extremely powerful even for, services and sites like this. Okay, so let's talk about design patterns. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard of MVC, or Model View Controller. It's a very popular design pattern that separates parts of your app and puts the handling of, incoming requests and routing, things like that, into the controller, the data access into the model, and the user interface component into the view. Well, Django is sometimes referred to as an MVC framework, and that's not completely wrong. It is heavily influenced by MVC, and it does use many MVC concepts. However, the C, or the controller, is mostly handled by the framework itself, and it works a little different. So it's put into the MTV, or Model Template View pattern, okay, which works a little different. Basically, it's, just like MVC, it has a data access layer in the model. Anything to do with interacting, relating data, validating data, that's all going to go into the model. The template is the presentation layer, so all presentation related decisions go here. How things should be displayed on the web page, or whatever type of document. And then the view is basically the basic logic layer. Okay, it can access the model directly and displays the appropriate template. So the view works kind of like a view controller, and that's basically a bridge between the models and templates. Okay, a lot of what a traditional controller would do in MVC is actually handled in the view. Okay, so that's the biggest difference between how Django works and then traditional MVC, like, let's say, Ruby on Rails. All right, another unique thing about Django is that it uses the concept of apps. Now, usually you think of an entire project as an app, but within Django, a single project or website can actually include multiple of what they call apps. So you could have, for example, a blog app, a client app to handle your client functions, a store app, and so on. Now, of course, you can have a single app in your website that, if it's a blog, and that's basically what we'll be doing. You can do that. That's just fine. You can also move apps from one project to another pretty easily, and you can even use other people's apps pretty easily. So this whole paradigm is very flexible and very scalable and reusable. All right, so the last thing before we get started I want to talk about is Python has something called virtual env, or virtual environments, which gives you a virtual environment for all of your Python instances. And this is what's recommended to use with Django. It's really easy to set up. It gives you isolated environments with their own directories. This is the recommended way to develop Django apps. It's not absolutely necessary, but it is definitely recommended. Now, this used to be very difficult to do on Windows, but it's much more simple now. In fact, everything to do with Python is much more simple on Windows. So if you are on Windows, don't worry about it. I'll show you exactly how to do it. All right, so that's going to be it for the slides, guys. Let's go ahead and jump in and let's set up Python. We're going to install Python from scratch. We're going to set up Django with pip, which is the package manager for Python. We're going to set up our virtual environment, and then we're going to build our simple blog application. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so the very first thing that we're going to do is install Python. Now, at this time, the latest version for Python 3 is version 3.6.3, and depending on when you're watching this, it may be a later version, but you should be all right. Alright, so we're going to go to python.org. I'm going to go ahead and download it. Go ahead and save it and just open it when done. And it's just going to be a simple Windows installer. And like I said, you know, installing Python on Mac or Linux is going to be a little different. So just, you know, it's all over the web. There's tutorials, there's all kinds of stuff. If you want to watch my to-do app video, that'll show you how to get everything set up on Ubuntu. Although I think we used Python 2.7 in that video, if I remember correctly. But let's go ahead and click run, and we're going to install, let's see, I'm going to make sure that you click add Python 3.6 to your path so that you can run the Python command. Let's see, we're going to say customize installation. I just want to make sure that we have everything we need. Now pip, which I said is the package manager for Python, it's kind of like npm for Node.js and JavaScript, or it's kind of like Ruby gems for Ruby on Rails. You definitely want this included. Now this is something that has been made much easier, because before you had to install it separately when you're using Windows. So now it's included with this installer, which makes things much easier. So let's go ahead and click next, and it's going to install it in this directory here. That's fine. Let me just check this stuff. Yeah, that should be good. So we'll click install, and that's going to get Python set up on our system. Alright, so that should be set up. Let's go ahead and click close, and now we should have Python installed. Now, as I told you guys before, I'm going to be using MySQL. So if you're on Windows, what I would suggest doing is installing XAMPP, or actually if you're on Windows or Mac or Linux, it's actually completely cross-platform. But this includes MySQL, Apache, PHP. It also includes a tool called PHP where you can, you know, manage your MySQL databases and look at your tables and all that. Now, Django uses database migrations, so we can actually do everything through our application rather than going into MySQL itself. But PHP is really good to actually see the stuff that happened that the migrations did, the tables it created and all that. So we will be using it for that. So if you want to follow along, you know, exactly, then go ahead and get XAMPP installed. All right, so let's close that up, and let's open up a command line. So I'm going to open up my standard Windows command line as administrator. Now, if you're on Mac or Linux, just open up your terminal. And usually, if you guys have watched my videos in the past, I usually use git bash on Windows instead of the standard command line. But I've had some issues with Python and Django and the virtual environment using git bash, so we're going to use this. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, just make sure that Python is installed correctly. So let's say Python version. All right, we'll also check on pip, which is the Python package manager. Good. And we need to install the virtual environment. Okay, so we need to install something called virtual environment wrapper. Now, for that, we use pip. So we'll say pip install virtual env wrapper. Okay, now if you're on Mac or Linux, you can do that, but if you're on Windows, you just want to do -win. Okay, now it says it's already satisfied because I already have it installed. Yours may look a little different, but it should say it's installed successfully. All right, now once you do that, you can create virtual environments. Now before I do that, I'm going to just go into where I want to create my project. So I'm going to cd ... into my C drive, and then I'm going to go to users/brad/projects. Oops. /projects, and let's clear this. And then from here, we're going to make a virtual environment. We can do that with mk virtual env and then name it. I'm going to call it pi1. All right, and what it's going to do is it's going to create a directory in your users folder called envs. So you can see right here, envs/pi1. This isn't where we actually create our project or anything. This is just where the environment files go. All right, and now you can see right here we're using pi1. Now, if you have multiple environments and you want to switch, you just do work on and then the name of the environment. So work on pi1. All right, so now we're ready to actually install Django. So let's say pip install Django. All right, and that's going to basically install it globally. And it might take a minute. All right, so now Django's installed. I'm just going to clear this out. And we're going to basically generate an application, and we can do that with a utility called Django-admin. Okay, and we're going to run a command called start project. And then we're going to name the project. I'm just going to call it Django project. Okay, so now if I were to do a dir or ls or whatever, just to see what we have here, you'll see there's a folder called Django project. So I'm going to cd into Django project. All right, and then we want to open up our text editor here. So I'm using Visual Studio Code, so I'm able to just do code dot, and that'll open it up in that folder. All right, so let's see what that actually gave us, creating our Django app. So we have another folder called Django project, which has a couple files. And in addition to that folder, we have a manage.py file. All right, right here I'm getting a warning or info saying the Python extension is recommended if you're using VS Code. So I would also recommend that. So if you want to go to extensions right here and search for Python, it's this first one right here. We'll just click install, and that just gives us like some, you know, IntelliSense and hinting and stuff like that. And then we can just hit reload, and now we have the Python extension installed. All right, so anyway, the manage.py is the CLI client, or the command line interface tool that we use to do different things, and it's basically a wrapper of Django admin. Okay, remember we used that Django admin to create our application. Manage.py basically is the same thing, except it's localized to this specific project. So we use it to do things like run migrations, run the dev server, things like that. Okay, and the actual file, the code here, we don't need to do anything with. It's just the utility that we're going to use within the command line. All right, now in Django project, we have a couple files. This $_init $_py. Now this is complaining about pylinter not installed. I guess, no, I don't want that. Let's say disable. All right, so this file is empty by default, and we're going to keep it empty. This is required just to be here to treat the directory as containing packages. By default, it's empty, and that's fine. Like I said, we're going to keep it empty. But just having it here gets rid of some confusion that has to do with file names and modules and things like that. All right, so nothing that we need to deal with. Settings.py has all of our settings, and I'm not going to go through everything here. Basically, you can see our base directory. Secret key, this is your production key. You don't want to share this. If you push your code to GitHub, you don't want this included. This is for things like encrypting sessions, things like that. All right, we also have the debug value set to true, which is what we want for now in development. That's going to give us, you know, helpful messages, things like that. Before you deploy, you're going to want to set that to false. You're also going to want to include your domain names that you want to use for this application when you deploy in this allowed hosts array. Down here, installed apps. Any application or any app you create, you need to add to this array here. And you can see there's some core apps that are included, including the admin app. Django comes with an entire admin administration area, which is an application itself, or I should say app. That's what they're called in Django. In Django, but that's included. Authentication, sessions, all that stuff is already here. Okay, middleware. Basically, these are components responsible for doing something. For instance, authentication. We have our auth middleware. That is actually dependent on the session middleware, which is right here. So the order of middleware is very important. Okay, and you can also write your own custom middleware, but that's way beyond this tutorial. All right, and then we have our templates, options for templates. That's pretty much it. Oh, database. So Right now, we're set up to use SQLite 3, which is not a really great database for production applications. Like I said, we're going to be using MySQL, so we're going to be changing this up quite a bit. Okay, so that's the settings file. urls.py, this is basically routing, setting up our routes and URLs, and they basically use regular expressions here for the URL patterns. You can see there's already one set for the admin area. So basically this means this caret symbol here means start with. So it's going to look at routes that start with admin/, and then that's going to go to the admin app itself. Okay, each app will have its own URLs file, and this is basically just saying anything that's admin/ is going to go on to this URLs file. And you'll see this later on. It'll make more sense when we create our post app. All right, and then WSGI is the primary development platform for Django. It's basically the common standard for web servers and applications. When we ran that start project, it set up a simple default WSGI configuration for us, and that's basically what that is. All right, so you can see the file structure by default is very, very simple. So what I want to do now is actually run our web server. So let's go back to our command line here, and let's run Python, and then we're going to use our manage.py, okay, which is our command line tool, and then we're going to use run server. Okay, that's the command we want to use. And then what that's going to do is it's going to run the server on our local host on port 8000. So we can actually now go to a browser, and we can go to localhost port or :8000. And there we go. So it says it worked. Congratulations on your first Django powered web page. All right, so now our server is running. Now notice this message we get. You have 13 unapplied migrations. So if you're not familiar with migrations, basically they're files that will do things to our database. So they'll create tables, they'll add data, things like that. And if you're familiar with Ruby on Rails or Laravel, or a bunch of other frameworks that use migrations, they work in, very similar. So unapplied migrations means that there's basically migrations waiting, and those have to do with the admin app that's included by default, authentication, users, things like that. They haven't been applied, which means we haven't created them in our database yet. Now we could apply them by running this command here, Python manage.py migrate. But if we did that now, it would go into the SQLite database, which is not what I want to use. I want to use MySQL. So we're not going to run that just yet. We're going to hook up MySQL. All right. Now, in order to do that, we need to install the MySQL client for Django or for Python. So let's do Control-C to get out of this, and we're going to install it with pip. So we'll say pip install, and it's called MySQL client. Okay, so now that we have that installed, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Now that we have that installed, let's go ahead and go to our Django project settings file and go to where our database thing is right here, our database object or dictionary. And I'm actually going to comment this one out and then create a new one. All right, so we'll say databases equals some curly braces, and we want to say default. Okay, so default, and this is going to be engine. All right, so engine is going to be Django.db.backends.mysql. Okay, just like up here they had SQLite 3, we're going to use MySQL. All right, then we're going to say, put a comma there, and we're going to say name. So name is that's actually the database name. Now we haven't created it yet, so what I'm going to do is go to localhost/phpMyadmin, which is a tool included with XAMPP to, create databases and stuff. Now you can use your standard SQL shell if you want, but this is an easier way. So let's click on databases and let's create one. We'll call it Django project and create. Okay, so now we have that database created. Now we're not going to have to go through and create our tables and all that. That stuff is all done through migrations, which is nice. We just needed to create the database itself. So for the name, it's going to be Django project. All right, then you're going to want to put your database user, which for me is going to be root. And you're going to want to put your password, which for me is 1 through 6, and then your host. Okay, host is going to be localhost 99.9% of the time, and you can also define port, but we're going to leave that blank. All right, so that's our database. So let's save it. And now everything should be set up so that we can run our migration, and all those 13 default migrations should now go into this database, if we're lucky, if things worked out right. So let's go back to our command line, clear this out, and let's run Python manage.py, and we want to do migrate. All right, so everything looks okay here. Let's go over to phpMyAdmin and reload the database, and you can see all of this stuff was added. All right, so we have our auth user table. This is going to contain our users. We can have different groups, okay, different user groups. All our migrations, all our session stuff, it all gets put in the database, and we have tables for all that stuff. So you can see how easy it is to get this stuff set up. Okay, now if we start our server back up, so let's say Python manage.py run server, and you can see that message about the 13 migrations is now gone, and we reload, it's going to work, and we should now be able to go to /admin, and we have a back-end interface, okay, an admin interface. Now, right now, there's no user for us to log in as, so we can actually use manage.py to create a super user so that we can log in here. So let's stop the server with Control-C, clear, and we're going to do Python manage.py, and then we want to run create super user. I spell that right? Create super user space, and then -- username equals, and then whatever you want the name to be. I'm going to use Brad, and you also want to put your email, so -- email, and I'm going to set that to brad@gmail.com. All right, so we're going to go ahead and run that, and then it's going to ask us for a password. Okay, so I'm going to do, I think it has to be 8 characters. So I'm going to do 1 through 8. Again. Oh, it's too common. Okay, so there's some rules. It can't be all numeric. So let's see, I'll do ABC 1 2 3 double exclamation. Okay, so now we have a password. So let's go back to our, well, first we have to run the server again. So let's do run server. Let's reload the admin page, and now we'll log in with Brad, ABC 1 2 3 double exclamation, log in, and there we go. So we have an entire back-end admin area, and we can add groups. Okay, we can add user groups here. We can add more users if we want. Okay, so username, password, password confirmation. If we look at the users, you'll see the Brad user we have, which has staff status. So there's a lot of functionality in a very, very small amount of code. I mean, we really haven't even written any code. All we did was change up some configurations, and we already have all of this functionality. All right, so you can see that Django is definitely for rapid development. All right, so right now we don't have any apps, okay? Remember the concept of apps, and we want this to be a blog. So we need to create a blog app, or a post app is actually what I'm going to call it. So I'm going to stop the server here. Actually, let's log out of the admin, and let's Control-C and stop the server. Clear this up, and we're going to create a posts app, okay? So we can do that using manage.py. So we're going to say Python manage.py, and we're going to say start app, and we're going to call this posts. Okay, now if we look over in our folder structure, we now have a posts folder. Close that up. We have a posts folder, and it has a bunch of files. It has the init.py, which we're just going to leave. That's going to be blank. It has an admin.py, which has to do with adding models to your interface here. So for instance, we're going to want to be able to add posts from the admin area. We're going to get into that later. Apps.py we're not really going to mess with. It's basically app specific settings. Models is where we create our models, so we will have a post model. Tests for testing, which we're not going to get into. And then views is basically it's basically our controller. This is where we create like our index, our details method, which is going to we can interact with the model, we can pull our posts in, and then we can load templates or load views from here as well. So you'll see how all of that works. All right, now before we can actually use our posts app that we just created, we have to go to our Django project settings.py and add it as an app. All right, so up here where we have installed apps, I'm going to put it right as the first one, and we're just going to put in posts, okay, and put a comma here. Okay, that has to be done. Now what we want to do is go to the urls.py that's in the Django project, and we basically want to say we want to put another one of these. Just like admin goes to the admin app, we want anything that goes from posts to go to our application. Now to include our application, we can use the include method, and we can say posts.urls. Okay, now this include method or function right here, this isn't going to work by default. We're going to get an error because we need to import this. Okay, just like we imported URL to use that, we need to import include. So we're going to put a comma here and say include. All right, and we can actually get rid of all these comments here. We don't need this. All right, so basically what's going on is anything that goes to /posts in our application, so /posts/ is going to then get passed on to the URLs file inside of our posts app, which is not there yet. You can see there isn't a URLs file. We actually have to create that ourselves. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. So let's save this. All right, and let's go to our posts app or post folder that we have here and create a new file called urls.py. Okay. Now, just like the other URLs file, we need to import a couple things. So we're going to say from django.conf.urls. We want to import URL and include. Okay, actually I don't think we need include here, just URL. And then we're also going to want to import our views. Okay, so we're going to say from dot, meaning from all, we want to import views. Okay, now we want to create a URL patterns array. Oops. So URL patterns, and you can see if we look at the other URLs file, we're doing the same thing. Okay, so in here, what I want to do is I want to load an index method in the views file. So we're going to say URL. Actually, we don't. You might see me use semicolons in Python. We don't use semicolons, but at my core, I'm a JavaScript developer. and a PHP developer, so you may see me mess up and put a semicolon in here and there. All right, so we're going to say R, so basically route, and we want a route for just /posts, okay? Not post / something, just posts. So the expression here is going to be caret, which is it means start with, and then money sign, which is end with, okay? So basically start with and end with nothing. So post / nothing. That's what this means, and I know that may be a little confusing. All right, and then what we want to do is put in a second parameter here, and we're going to say views.index. So it's going to look in our views.py file right here for a method called index, okay, and it's going to load that. And then we also just want to give this a name, so we're going to say name equals index, like that. All right, so that's our first URL pattern, or our first route. So let's save that, and then we're going to go into our views.py file, and from here we want to create that index view, or index method. So in Python, to create a function or a method, you use the def keyword. So define index, define index. Now this is going to take in a request. Okay, all our routes will take in a request, and then we'll put a colon here. So that defines a function. And then in here, what we'll do is we're going to say return. I just want to basically return a response. Okay, now ultimately we're going to want to render a template, but just to test things out, I just want to send a response to the browser. So we want to bring in something here from Django.http. We want to import HTTP response. Okay, and this is what we'd use to create a RESTful API. So I'm going to say return HTTP response, and then in here I'm just going to put some text. I'm going to say hello from posts. All right, just like that. So let's save this. And now hopefully what will happen is we can go to /posts and we'll see this in the browser. Okay, so we'll probably have to restart the server. Yeah, let's go ahead and run our server. So we want to do, where is it? Python manage.py run server. Okay, so now the server's running. So let's go to /posts, and there we go, hello from posts. Okay, so we're not loading any views or anything like that. All we're doing is sending out a response with some text. All right, just to show you how the URLs work, how these all connect together. So just to reiterate, I know that this may be a little repetitive if you guys already understand, but the main URLs file is saying anything that has post, starts with post / is going to be basically passed off to the URLs file in the posts app, which is this file. Okay, and then we're saying for the route that is nothing, so post / nothing, is going to load the index method from the views file. Okay, we're also naming this index. And then if we look in the views file, we now have our index method. Okay, and then we're just basically sending out a response with some text. Okay, that's exactly what's happening. Now, obviously, we're going to want to render a template. So what we're going to do is, let's just comment this out because we're not doing that anymore. What we're going to do instead of returning HTTP response is we're going to return render. Okay, that's what's used to render templates, and that's already being brought in up here by default. So we'll say render, and then we want to pass in our request. And then we want to specify the template that we want to load. Okay, so I'm going to say posts /index.html. And I know we haven't created that yet. Don't worry about it. Okay, so let's save that. Now, if we try to load this, we're going to get an error that says template does not exist. So what we're going to do is inside of our posts folder, we're going to create a folder called templates. And then inside here, we're going to create a folder called posts. Now I know this looks a little weird because it's posts, templates, posts, but if we just put our templates inside, or our HTML files inside the templates, it's going to get confused with other apps in their templates. So you want to specify the name of the app here as well. So let's create a file called index.html. Okay, and then all I'm going to do here is put in an h1 and say hello from index.html. And we'll save that. And then let's go and reload. Let's see, that didn't work. Posts index.html. So we're loading that here. Let's see, what am I missing? Might have to restart the server. What do we got here? See. Internal server error posts. You know what? Let's restart this and run the server again and reload. There we go. So we just had to restart the server, and you can see that it's loading the index.html file. It's also parsing the HTML. We have an h1. All right, good. Now we're going to want to have, you know, our head and body tags and all that in our HTML, and we're not going to want to include that in every single file, so we're going to have to create a layout. All right, so what we're going to do is in our templates post folder, let's create a new file called layout.html. All right, and in here we're going to put our basic, you know, HTML tags. I'm just using Emmet, so I did exclamation tab, and it gives us this basic structure. So for the title, I'm just going to say Django. Actually, we'll call it Traversy Media Blog. Okay, so we'll give it a title, and I also want to include Materialize CSS, which is a CSS framework. So if we go to Get Started, all we need to do is include the CSS link right here, and then the JavaScript link. So we're going to paste this in the head right here, and let's see. Actually, we don't even need the JavaScript link because we're not doing anything to do with